Wonderful.
So we are at 12B1. Maybe cut off on the top there, but it's after 12A4. And we're in the middle of this discussion about what was going on with Vashti. We had a whole discussion last time about how to look at this text and also the historical background for a very, negative, portrayal of not just Achashverosh, we wouldn't be so surprised, but also Vashti. And she's accused of being a real tormentor, an ugly, cruel tormentor of Jewish women. And therefore she gets punished to pay her back for her behavior. Midah keneged midah, measure for measure, right? Poetic justice. So now we're up to the right-hand column. And after the first, bunch of lines where it says the Gemara returns to the Megillah's narrative, right?
Yep.
Okay, who's going to read?
I'm going to end the suspense. I'm ready to read.
Wow. All right.
The Gemara returns to the Megillah's narrative of Ahasuerus's confrontation with Vashti at the party. The Megillah relates, and Queen Vashti refused. The Gemara analyzes this. Now, let us see. She was a lewd woman. As the master said, both Ahasuerus and Vashti intended to act immorally. If so, what is the reason she did not come when Ahasuerus ordered her to appear naked? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, this teaches that she broke out in leprosy, as she did not want to appear naked. In a Baraita, a different reason why she did not want to appear naked was taught. The angel Gabriel came and made her grow a tail. Perfectly logical.
Okay. Right. And therein, lies a tail or something, whatever the phrase is, right? So, okay. How do we see this? How do we read this particular text? What's the question? Right. The question is, we assume this person is a disgusting moral reprobate. She's a lewd woman. She's always, she in fact set up her own party with the idea of engaging in lewd, promiscuous, immoral activity. So now when she's being asked to do so, all of a sudden she refuses. What could possibly be the answer? Okay, so Jen, yeah.
So even if we take the rabbi's idea that she's this lewd woman, which, whatever, okay, then she still gets to choose who she's lewd with. It's not the same thing as, you don't, just because you chose particular people for your orgy doesn't mean you're willing to strip in front of everyone and indiscriminately. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think that you're right. I think that that's clearly not within the calculus of this conversation. They can't, it's an all or nothing stereotypical idea. It can't understand that choice inheres at every moment. And whatever, your reputation is, that doesn't mean that at this particular moment, you're not making choices. So that's for sure. Yeah, no, I think that we need to say that. In their imagination, again, not one of the best moments of rabbinic imagining, I would say, but in their imagination, she has a history of not making limiting choices, right? That's how they're assuming that she is. So therefore, they can't understand why all of a sudden she got religion, so to speak. Why all of a sudden now she's not ready to party. So this gives them the opportunity to get more revenge on Vashti. And as I said, last time, Vashti just simply is the screen upon which they're projecting all of their pain and resentment and hatred and fear and desire, all of these combined emotions and concepts, and historical sense. She's just she's accepting, she's just receiving all of this stuff from them. And what do they end up saying? They end up saying, had it been up to her, she of course would have agreed to engage in another terrible, orgiastic, party. But it wasn't up to her. She was forced to refuse. She never would have refused freely, but she was forced to refuse. Why? What's the answer?
Either she had a skin disease that made her, unattractive, or she grew some kind of an appendage that likewise made her unattractive.
And why would any of these things have happened?
As punishment for her
right. So
earlier
this is
behavior.
the imagination. The imagination here is that this is already, inflicting her with some kinds of punishments to make her pay for everything that she did up to now. What kind of precedents do we have that might sort of lay the groundwork a little bit for this kind of idea? Remember when you have to, and again, I have to check it myself for the details, our patriarchs find themselves in difficult situations. There's a famine in the land and they have to run away. So you have two Abraham stories and one Isaac story. They run to Egypt, they run to Gerar in Philistine territory. And in each case, the matriarch is abducted by the ruler with an eye on taking her for himself. And God intervenes, right? And God stops the ruler and the whole household in that case. Again, I'd have to refresh my memory which one is which, because they all blend together for me. But God intervenes by stopping them from being able to have relations with her because they get sick. So here's another example where God is coming into the picture, behind the scenes, literally. Again, this is a God's behavior that's not mentioned in the text, that's not cited as God is never mentioned in any way. So this is a behind the scenes punishment by God to and to afflict this person who's, from the rabbi's perspective, whose whole being was about beauty and about sexuality. So she gets afflicted with tzara'at, or again, measure for measure, she gets afflicted with a tail. So she becomes animalistic. You can get even more Freudian if you want to think about with the tail. So all of these things are the rabbis imagining revenge, right? And imagining that this is revenge that they can't exact, but certainly they would want God to be their champion and to exact punishment on her. We have another image like that in the Passover stories, where Pharaoh is imagined to be struggling with tzara'at, with leprosy, and he goes to the Nile to try to get rid of it. That's where Moses, sees him in the Nile, and also he bathes in the blood of Jewish babies because his doctors tell him that this is going to be the cure for his tzara'at, for his skin torments. So there's where it gets even flipped in the other way, that the torment becomes actually a trigger for even more oppression and more killing and suffering for the Jewish people. So this is the kind of grim, mindset of the rabbis, wishing just every curse and every humiliation upon the people that they see as their tormentors.
Earlier in this tractate, we read about procedures. Oh, it wasn't leprosy though; it was a different skin disease. That the sufferer is supposed to be isolated for some
That's leprosy. It's leprosy and also certain genital emissions.
Yeah, I mean, there's this ongoing view of leprosy as being retribution or punishment for sins.
Correct.
I was reading in Kings, in 2 Kings, when Azariah is who's otherwise a good king, but hasn't gotten rid of the
high places.
Right, and he's inflicted with leprosy, and isn't really able to perform his functions, and his son takes those over as a regent. But the leprosy just is. It's I'm sure people have written about it. Just unclear why leprosy is always viewed as this specifically uniquely punitive sort of disease.
So we've talked about it many, many times. I'm not going to revisit it a lot now, but it's the even though it's not leprosy, right? Even though
right, it's not what we would.
It doesn't satisfy the symptomology of leprosy.
Right.
Nevertheless, if we just look at leprosy itself, leprosy was one of the most scary and horrific diseases that people, would encounter. People would run away from lepers. People would isolate lepers. People, the real lepers. So the idea, because the lepers look like Walking Dead. I mean, all of a sudden your nose falls off, or your toes fall off. You were like this. It was creepy.
Right.
So people were creeped out by it. So whatever associations, get piled on, leprosy was considered a very, very scary and cruel condition. And, the rabbis were convinced that sara'at, which was not leprosy, but sara'at, whatever this particular disease was definitely, in the hands of God, and targeted specific people for whatever sins they committed. All right. Okay, we don't have to go through all the leprosy stories. So back to here. So this is, as I say, this is a little bit of imaginative revenge. And again, to try to humiliate, degrade this person who represents, in the rabbinic mind, who represents all of what's wrong with the non-Jewish civilization, and how it has treated the Jewish people. Okay, the verse concludes.
The verse concludes, so the king became greatly incensed by her refusal. The Gemara inquires, why did his anger burn within him so much? Rava said, because Vashti sent him a message. You stable boy of my father, Belshazzar. My father drank wine and the equivalent of what 1,000 people drink and did not get drunk. Whereas that man, that is you, Achashverosh, became foolish from his wine. Upon hearing this insult, immediately his anger burned within him.
Okay, so again, the rabbis are having a field day, letting their imaginations run. And they started imagining the dynamics between Vashti and Achashverosh. And we've already established that Vashti is royalty, and apparently Achashverosh really wasn't. If you look at the note 14, I guess 14, it is.
Yeah. Some editions do not include the word bar in the text. Some commentators observe that it seems rather unlikely that Achashverosh would have been Belshazzar's stable boy, for he was actually the son of King Darius. Rather, Vashti meant that compared to Belshazzar, her father, Achashverosh was as lowly as a stable boy.
Okay, so
A certain amount of sense.
there's some kind of status baiting going on, and this, of course, is again a game of humiliation. So she's humiliated objectively with this skin affliction, with this terrible bodily deformity, and now she takes it out on him, because she's not going to admit that this is what happened, right? She's not going to admit that she's in bad shape. So instead, she says, "Look at you, you're just a drunken nobody, right? My father could hold his liquor and you can't, and you're just a zero." So does this also come out of nowhere? What kinds of elements within the story as we have it in the text, in the Megillah itself, what possibly do we have to a little bit bring this into some context, that, and not just out of the thin air? I think the end. Yeah. Okay, Bill.
Well, it just came to me that as earlier on, the Gemara comments that, or the Megillah comments that Ahasuerus became merry with wine, which I suppose is a euphemism for he got quite drunk.
Right.
And
That's when he. Yes. So that's when he does the invitation. But what's the what about this, like, really hissing kind of back and forth between well, it's not back and forth, that Vashti basically has this contempt for Achashverosh. The answer is, if you look at the rest at the story as it develops, this becomes a major issue in the beginning of the Megillah. Are people going to let the woman not honor her husband? If we have to make sure that the man is always the head of the household, and we're going to make a rule like that, right? We're going to send out letters all through the kingdom that liot kol ish sorer beveito, that each man, husband, should be the ruler in his own house, right? It's one of the first of the Megillah jokes, that you can make this into a rule, right? But this is all part of a piece. So what we're having here is that the bickering that goes on between Achashverosh and Vashti is part of this ugly, sense of trying to impose a certain kind of system, trying to impose the patriarchy, if you want to call it that, trying to impose a way to have a family in one way and one way only. So she's not respecting him, and that's going to be a terrible blow to him. So what we're seeing is the rabbis are saying the fact that she said, regrets, I'm really indisposed, I can't come today, I'm sorry. So he could be upset, but so upset, his anger burned in him, ma'od, so much. The answer is because it's something else. And that usually is the case, right? It's whenever you get your buttons pushed and you get angry about something that gets done or said, there's something often beyond the little particular thing that got done or not done. There's some other issue behind it, which is triggering it. So here's the speculation that the Gemara has. Okay. Then the king said.
Then the king said to the wise men, Gemara clarifies, who were these wise men? The rabbis.
Of course. Who else?
Who know the times, who know how to intercalcate years and establish the months of the Jewish calendar.
Intercalate years. So
intercalate years and establish the months of the Jewish calendar. All
right. So this is because the verse says that he. What does it say? It says Vayomer HaMelech LaChachamim Yodei Ha'itim. That's the verse, right? That's the verse in the Megillah. What is it? Verse 13 already? What are we? Yeah, verse 13. So there's an identifier. It doesn't just say that he spoke to the wise people, to the sages. It says specifically the sages who know about time, right? Yodei Ha'itim, who know about time. What does that have to do with anything? Why should he be worried about some kind of astrologers or some kind of, what's the, what does that have to do with anything? So the Gemara uses this as saying, well, what's one of the great skills of the rabbis? One of the great skills of the rabbis is who know how to intercalate years and establish the months of the Jewish calendar. So this was, we know historically, we've come across this before. This was an activity that was under rabbinic auspices. The idea of intercalating a year means, do we have a year as a regular 12-month year? This is in the Jewish year, or do we make it into a leap year? Do we make it into a 13-month year? Right, heads up, this coming Rosh Hashanah will begin a leap year. So, but we have this established already now as a mathematical system. Once upon a time, it wasn't a mathematical system per se, it was ad hoc. The rabbis would decide on a year-by-year basis whether or not they needed to make the coming year a leap year or not, whether they would have to add a month. That's a significant addition, right? It's not just a year, not just one more day in February. It's a whole month, right? The second Adar is the added month. So the rabbis would convene and they would have discussions about whether or not it would be necessary. And that had to do with a number of factors. Factors having to do with time itself. Is Passover getting to be too early? Look at how early Rosh Hashanah is this year, right? Rosh Hashanah is September 6th at night, early September. If we didn't intercalate the year, if we didn't make 13 months, if we didn't add another Adar, then Passover would be September, October, November, December, January, February, the very, very beginning of March. The very beginning of March. So the very beginning of March, you could still have snow on the ground. So, so that's why Passover is pushed down, and we add the month. So the Passover should stay in Aviv, in the springtime, and not become too early, right? Like the Ramadan system, which just lets the cycle keep getting earlier and earlier and never stop. So, but there were other things that the rabbis had to look. The rabbis had to look at what was going on agriculturally. That's obviously connected to the seasons, but it's also connected to the economy, and so on. Back in the old days, not anymore, but back in the old days, it would be impossible. It would have been impossible to make this coming year a leap year. It will be a leap year, but in the old days, when it wasn't done mathematically, you were not allowed to make a sabbatical year into a leap year, because a sabbatical year is a year where nobody can do any work in the fields. So the rabbis said, God forbid we should make people lose their farming ability for more time than they have to. So they would never make a leap year on a sabbatical year. Now things are different, because the whole sabbatical system was until the land of Israel was, reclaimed by the Zionists, was much less significant. But the whole point is that the rabbis had this power, and they zealously and jealously guarded this power, and they had their deliberations as very, very serious deliberations among themselves. And also in terms of looking through what would be the ongoing ramifications. If we make this year a leap year, when's the next year we're going to have to make a leap year, and so on and so forth. All that kind of stuff was considered an esoteric job, and only the sages and only certain sages were considered Yodei Ha'itim, those who knew the times. After the church forbade Jews creating their own calendar. That's when the calendar that we have today in the 350s CE, that's when the calendar we have today was created, because we weren't allowed to actually do these kinds of deliberations anymore. Yeah, Jen.
So, well, I completely get that this would make our sages, very, seem very knowledgeable, and which, but then no doubt they were, etc. But like historically, everybody had this. I mean, the Romans had the Flamandialis and others, of which I think Julius Caesar actually got stuck with that position and had to deal with an idiotic calendar that had to keep being adjusted. And hence we have now the Julian calendar that he created, which was then improved by Gregory. But like all ancient peoples had a priest or priests who dealt with this. So he would not, Akashaveros would not have had to go to specifically to the rabbis, just for their wisdom and knowing
Right.
these things.
Right.
So I feel like our sages should know that.
Of course they know that. Of course they know that. But this is one of these. Again, we've had it before. This is one of these, kind of like self-centered perspectives where it all revolves around us. Yes, they knew very well that calendars were tied to group identities. That's why they fought for their calendar, because that was one of the things. You imposed your calendar on the other people, and they lost their own ability to keep time. What does the Torah say? Right? Our getting out of Egypt was tied to the idea that we now adopted our own calendar and didn't follow the Egyptian calendar. So yeah, they knew that everybody had their own calendar. First of all, they always thought that their calendar is God's calendar and everybody else's calendar is a big mistake. And they also recognized that it was tough, that there was a lot of struggling, with the calculations. So yes, they're being here, proud and a little self-serving maybe. But we'll see how this comes out here, because it gets more complicated. Okay, so he's going to turn to the rabbis, because after all, we know that the rabbis are the most brilliant and most knowledgeable folks around. So, even Achashverosh knew that. Okay.
Ahasuerus said to them, "Judge her, Vashti, for me. How shall I respond to her behavior?" The rabbis said among themselves, "How shall we deal with this? Shall we tell him to kill her? We cannot, for tomorrow he will sober up a bit and demand her from us. Desiring her once again, he will hold us responsible for her death. Shall we tell him to let her go unpunished? We cannot, for she demeans the crown." To extricate themselves from this predicament, the sages told him, "From the day that the temple was destroyed and we were exiled from our land, the ability to give counsel has been taken from us because of the tribulations and upheavals of our exile, and we no longer know how to judge capital cases. Go to Ammon and Moab, who remain settled in their places, like wine that sits on its sediment. That is, they have not experienced upheaval and relocation. Thus, their wise men have the peace of mind to judge properly."
Okay, so now we see that this whole silly setup that stretches our credulity of that it really is a meditation about our own sense of agency and judgment in these very confusing times. And of course, that's one of the main points of Purim. Purim is about confusion. Purim is about even celebrating confusion, right? In the end, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to get to the point where we can't tell the difference between blessed be Mordechai and cursed be Haman. This is everything is upside down. It's topsy-turvy world. So this is, the Gemara throwing into the story the rabbi's own sense of impotence to a certain extent. Now that we really don't have our own stable situation, our own, authority and power over our lives, how can we know whether what we're going to say is going to work out well or not? Because it's not in our hands completely. Either way, we're going to get it, right? Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Because we have to satisfy this earthly power rather than just do whatever we think God wants. And Achashverosh is going to be upset whichever way we go. He's eventually going to not like it. So as long as we have to answer to the powers that be, we're screwed, to put it technically. And admitting this is what the rabbis do, and then they punt, right? What they say is, we can't make this decision because we no longer have that kind of wisdom, right? Do they believe that? Are they simply pushing away Achashverosh with some kind of bad excuse? Oh, I have a cold, I can't come over today. But you really don't have a cold? Or do you really have a cold?
It's real, and so far as they are genuinely concerned with what might happen as the ramifications of this spill out. So it's not just that they don't want to do it; it's that they want to keep their people as safe as they can, and also they don't have power, so they don't have political power.
And there's a kind of a bitter statement at the end. Go to the peoples that haven't had this exile experience, that haven't been uprooted. Let them, they have their own sense of confidence. We don't have the confidence anymore, right? We can't do it. Go to those people. Now, of course, those people are not for us heroes of wisdom and heroes of morality and so on, but just you've got your messy question. Go talk to other people who live in the messy world that you live in. We can't deal with this. Is there any suggestion which sentence they would have preferred to give if they would have been able to, if they had their druthers, if they would have been able to deliver their sentence without fear of retribution?
Yeah, I find they're talking about Vashti demeaning the crown somewhat disingenuous. What do they care about the crown? They're obviously not in a particularly respectful of Achashverosh. That just seems to be a made up kind of thing. So working back from that, I think they would prefer to kill her.
Right. So that I think you're right. But I would say that demeaning the crown is actually not a major, but a real concern of the rabbis. We have it in Pirkei Avot, Hevei mitpalel b'shloma shel malchut. Always pray for the well-being,
for the welfare of
the authorities, because without them, everybody's going to kill each other. Right? That's why we have our wonderful custom of praying for our country. Right? I have older editions of prayer books and chumashim that I inherited from my grandfather, and in the prayer they have the prayer for the Tsar.
Really?
Now I have in the Siddur, on Shabbos, and then we pray for the Tsar, and there's a whole prayer there for the Tsar, just like in Fiddler on the Roof. So, but a real prayer. So wherever we were, we took it very seriously. Of course, it was a painful reality to struggle with. And that's why this text is interesting in the kind of nuances that it has. It's totally resentful of it, but it also is very realistic about it. And the idea that there's a certain, law and order conservative feeling, which is we cannot simply let respect for the authorities to be dispensed with, even though we have no respect for those authorities because they are evil and corrupt and so on. But nevertheless, law and order is important.
They're essential.
So we have within our own imagined system that the rabbis, for instance, have an elaborate legal safety net that makes it pretty much impossible to kill anybody that kills a person, right? So capital punishment is halachically almost impossible. The king is not constrained by those limitations. If somebody is guilty of trying to do an insurrection, if you ever heard of that word, then that's a capital crime, period. The king kills the person who's trying to unseat them without the need for witnesses and trials and videos and commissions. Off with their head. So there's a difference between the preservation of societal order and then the theoretical laws of justice per se. So I think that there is that tendency. I think that in a kind of a isolated, neutral environment, if they were asked the question, is this person is undermining the king's authority? What's their punishment? They would definitely entertain seriously the idea that they should be put to death. Of course, saying that Vashti's refusal is any kind of coup d'état or any kind of serious rebellion is also up for argument. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, let's go. The Gemara interjects. No, you're on mute.
I have to go down to the bottom. It's not like ready available. But anyway, sorry. The Gemara interjects.
Wait. Now I'm noticing a chat.
Yep.
Bye from Beryl. I missed it. I'm sorry. Okay.
Bye, Beryl. Oh, too bad. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. The Gemara interjects. What the rabbi said to him was indeed reasonable, as it is written. Moab has been at ease from his youth, and he is settled on his sediment, and he has not been poured from vessel to vessel, nor has he gone into exile. Therefore, his taste has remained in him, and his scent has not changed.
Okay. So what was I going to say? Yeah. Let's just take a look at 21.
21. Tosafot maintained that the word Ammon must be deleted from the text. For the Gemara, Brachot 28a, states that Sennacherib came and dispersed the nation of Ammon among other nations. Thus, Ammon did not remain in their place. Furthermore, the verse cited by the Gemara below, Jeremiah, mentions only Moab, not Ammon. That's interesting.
So this is a little note which brings up the whole question of how stable was the region? How much were the local populations actually able to feel that they were in their ancestral homes? So this is in this particular story, the assumption is we have been exiled, everybody else is just able to stay in their own place. There's a certain rueful statement, but there's actually a halachic implication as well to whether we think that the nations of the world and not just us endured exile and dispersion. And that goes back actually to Moab. So even though here we're saying that Moab was never dispersed, we have a whole discussion by the rabbis about whether Moabites are allowed to enter into the covenantal community of Israel, right? Where the Torah says, no, a Moabite cannot enter into, not an Ammonite, and neither an Ammonite nor a Moabite can enter the Jewish people's covenantal community, right? In God's congregation, Kahal Hashem. So there's a report, a Mishnaic report that says that a person came a Moabite came and said, I want to join the Jewish people. Now, where do we have somebody from Moab that did join the Jewish people?
Ruth,
Ruth.
right?
So
the
that,
woman, unless you're named Ruth and you marry Jewish.
the answer that the rabbis gave was, a Moabite cannot join the Jewish people, but a Moabitess can join the Jewish people, because the people who are guilty of the terrible sins that Moab committed, that they didn't give us water and so on when we were starving and thirsty in the desert. That was the men, not the women. So the women are not judged in the same harsh way. Women from Moab can join, and that's the loophole for Ruth.
Mhm.
But later, now we have a story with the rabbis where you had a Moabite, a man, and he says, "What about me? I want to join the Jewish people." So one rabbi gets up and says, "Hey, this is an obvious verse. You know, you don't have to be the most learned person in the world. It says a Moabite can't join." And then somebody else gets up and says, "No. When Sancheriv came and had his whole campaign, and did all of the things that he did, taking over this land and this land, and with the 10 tribes and so on, he didn't just exile the 10 tribes. He exiled everybody, and he bilbeil et ha'umot. He mixed up all of the nations, and therefore we no longer identify anybody, no matter how much they may say they are from Moab or from Amalek. We don't believe them anymore, because all the pedigrees have been messed up. We don't live in a world anymore where those kinds of national identities are fixed and obvious. So halachically, the idea was that we live in a different world. History has changed the situation, and the biblical black and white situation no longer obtains. Right? But in this particular story, where we're talking about the situation in Esther's time, here we turn it around, right? Because in the end, it's not really about that. It's really just about, again, mulling over the problem of Jewish powerlessness within a non-Jewish world.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and that's what this verse, is saying, that, look at that. We have been subjected to dislocation and exile and being uprooted, and Moab, of all people, has it easy, right? They just sit back and enjoy themselves. Okay.
The Gemara continues its exposition of the Megillah's narrative. Immediately, Achashverosh followed their advice and looked elsewhere for counsel, as the verse states. And the one closest to him was Karshena, Shesar, Admasa, Tarshish, etc. An exposition of these names. Rabbi Levi said, this entire verse was said in reference to sacrificial offerings.
Obviously.
Karshena, this means that the ministering angels said before the Holy One, blessed is he, Master of the universe, did they, the Gentiles, ever offer before you lambs of the first year, as the Jews have offered before you?
Lambs of the first year, Karshena is now seen as Karim B'nai Shana. Right? So that's lambs, soft lambs of only a year old. Okay, so that's a phrase from the Torah, and then it's now said, oh, that's what Karshena. So we'll see the different explanations of the names, and then we come back and we'll try to figure out what does this mean about the angels. Go ahead.
Shesar, did the Gentiles ever offer before you 2 turtle doves, as the Jews have?
Shtei Torim, right? Shetar.
Admasa, did the Gentiles ever build before you an altar of earth, as the Jews have?
Right, that's the word Adama. Adama. Earth.
Tarshish, Did the Gentiles ever minister before you in the priestly garments, as the Jews have, regarding which it is written, Tarshish, Shoham, and Yashefeh?
Right, and yeah, right. So this is stones on the priestly breastplate.
Meres. Did the Gentiles ever
Meres.
stir? Meres. Meres. Meret.
Meres.
Meret.
Meres.
Meres.
William, not William.
Meres. Did the Gentiles ever stir the blood of sacrifices before you, as the Jews have? Marsena. Did the Gentiles ever stir the mincha offerings before you, as the Jews have? Memuchan. Did the Gentiles ever prepare a table before you, as the Jews have?
Right, the word muchan. So, Meres and Marsena are the same, right, related to the same thing. To limros is to mix, to stir up. So here we have the very creative and out of left field, so to speak, associations. Each one of these words alludes to some sacrificial aspect that the Jews engaged in. Yeah, Josie.
When Ahasuerus goes to these people for an answer, are they Jews or not?
No, so he went to the Moabites. We got off the hook. We got off the hook, and they say get rid of her, right? So we aren't then responsible for everything, right? But what do we make of this? What do we make of this midrash that really goes so far afield to start making these connections?
Mm.
What are the angels saying?
I'm not at all sure, because it seems to be about the sages telling Ahasuerus to go ask somebody else, and he agrees. He goes and asks somebody else, and then we get this explanation of the words as referring to the sacrifices. I have to confess that I don't get the connection.
So first of all,
the issue was what do I do with Vashti? How do I deal with Vashti? The rabbi said we can't answer that question. We're not in a position to do so. So ask your fellow pagans out there. And then we get this long thing about the names offensively associated with sacrifices. I'm missing something, but I don't know quite what.
Right. So first of all, there's also another pun, and that is the word v'hakarov elav, right? The one closest to him was.
Oh yeah, that's sacrifices. Yeah.
So that word karov is like korban.
Korban, right? The sacrifices that brought
closer with these things, with these sacrifices. So what this though is follows the previous statement, which in its own kind of like ironic way is bemoaning the situation of the Jews vis-a-vis everybody else. We have been exiled. We have been taken away from our land. We have been, our temple has been destroyed. And now we can't, even think straight, so to speak. And Moab is sitting there, pleased as punch, so peaceful. They have it so nice. And that now is what we have as this next piece. Like God in heaven. Why did they deserve this? Did they ever serve you the way we have? Look at all the different ways that we have served you. Look at every single gift and offering that we have brought to you, right? We've done all of these things. So what gives? Why in the end is it that they enjoy peace and security and power? And we are not. And not only that, but we have to actually make excuses for ourselves because we're so afraid to open our mouths that because anything we say is going to get us in trouble. So this is the angels protesting to God, saying, look at this situation. Why do the Jews deserve this? Yeah, Jen.
So when we look at like Jeremiah and others, their reasoning had nothing to do with the sacrifices we offered, right? It was about the poor and the widows and income inequality and whatever other sins we were doing that way. So it's interesting to me that here they're just talking about the sacrifices who nobody ever said was a problem. Like no one ever, Jeremiah wasn't like, you're not making the right sacrifices.
Right.
So-
So yeah, the answer is depending on which, moment in the conversation you're in, you'll be at this point, you make this point, or you'll make the opposite point. Yes, for sure. The prophets constantly complain.
Not saying that excuses our suffering, by the way. Not saying I agree with Jeremiah.
No, I hear you, but the prophets, say this again and again. You think that you give the sacrifices and that gets you, in with God, and that's your ticket, right? No, that you have to, do justice and righteousness and be compassionate, and poor people need to be helped, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, it doesn't really count. But despite, modern times where the prophetic message has been read to say, okay, so sacrifices are completely bad. That's not the message of the prophets. The message of the prophets is you're supposed to do the sacrifices, but don't you understand why you're doing the sacrifices? So it's supposed to be integrated together. So the sacrifices count. The sacrifices count for something. Not everybody who gave a sacrifice then, kicked the poor person, after they left the temple. There were people who gave sacrifices and also did the right thing. Yeah, Josie.
Where does this leave modern Judaism? Because the sacrifices are not part of anybody's Judaism that I'm ever aware of.
Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself. I
It's
have the
not
coal,
done anywhere.
right after we're finished, I have the coals all heated up on my barbecue, and I'm going to
You
get.
have your own high place?
Yeah. No, of course. Once the second temple was destroyed,
There goes.
this became the biggest issue. Where are we? What do we do?
Yeah.
How do we stay close to God and there are multiple answers, but and one answer was the Christian answer. The Christian answer was no, Judaism is dead. That that the temple and the sacrifices were taken over by Jesus.
Jesus is the lamb.
Jesus is the sacrifices, and that's why the sacrifices keep going, because his story and faith in him is the continuation of the sacrifices. And if you don't have a continuation of the sacrifices, then it's hopeless. So therefore Judaism is rejected and done with. And the whole fight of Judaism is to say no. The whole fight of Judaism is to say, even though we don't have the sacrifices, we're not done yet. And we have a relationship with God. But this is part of the struggle. So these angels are putting into words some of this frustration and some of this wondering about, so then what gives? What does it mean? How do we continue?
Thank you.
The struggle that we have goes on to this very day. Okay. Yeah. All right, let's continue.
The Megillah continues. And Memuchan said, a Baraita taught, Memuchan is Haman. And why was he called Memuchan? Because he was destined for punishment, that is, to be hanged.
Right, the word Muchan again is prepared. So now we have a shift back. After we had this little, very weird, surprising set of associations that this is the angels, and each of these names have to do with Jewish service to God. Mumuchan is understood as preparing a table before you, as the Jews have. We have a table with the bread in the temple. We did all of this. So Mumuchan is about that. So now we said, okay, good. We expressed ourselves about that frustration. Now let's get back to the story as the story, right? And now Mumuchan is Haman. Back to the story. It has nothing to do with Jewish sacrifice, right? This person Mumuchan, who disappears from the story. Haman becomes the major player. So he now is identified with Haman. He's called Memuchan because all, believe me, are ready at this point. He was, destined to be hanged. So look at note 40.
Note 40, that's Rashi's interpretation. Alternatively, the Gemara means that Haman was destined to dispense punishment to others, namely to Vashti and to the Jews. That's
Right.
according to Maharsha.
Because the phrase is Muchan lepuranut, ready for punishment. So the way Rashi reads it is he was ready to be punished, ready for punishment. The way other people read it is he's always ready to punish other people. This guy was a vindictive SOB. And this is the way he approached life. And therefore, he's the guy who jumps up first of all of these people, what is it? Karshana and Shetar and Admata. So all these people are asked their opinion. He's got an opinion right away because he's Muchan lepuranut. He's ready. Anytime you ask him any question, he's already got the vindictive answer. He doesn't have to think about it. So he's ready to punish Vashti. He's ready to punish the Jews. He's ready to punish. That's the other way to read this phrase. Rashi is reading it from the kind of perspective of saying, of course, we never knew God's hand is a hidden hand, but all of this was actually being worked out from the beginning in order to get Haman in trouble, right? So this is the standard kind of way of reading the godly machinations that are behind the scenes. The other one is much more of just an analysis of what kind of person this Haman guy was. Okay. Gemara observes.
The Gemara observes, Rav Kahana said, from here we see that a boar leaps to the front. Memuchan is mentioned last in the previous verse, indicating that he was the least important. Yet he answered Achashverosh first.
Right. So this is a phrase that became a standard phrase in Jewish literature. Hedyot kofetz barosh. Right. That if somebody's ready with an answer right away without thinking, you know that they're really not thoughtful. Right. The word hedyot can have many different meanings. It a little bit is allied to the word idiot. But it doesn't necessarily mean that at all. But it can mean simply not a specialist, not a person of a particular status, and also just not a person who has earned a status. So all of those different kinds of ways of looking at it. So that's the mark of this person, right? A person who has wisdom thinks a little bit. A person who has wisdom is wise enough to know that everything is complicated and that you have to actually give some consideration to the pros and cons of something. Look at the way the rabbis were saying before, well, if we say this, then this might happen. If we say this, then this might happen. Oy vey. That's not such a good thing. So, but no, if you're not thoughtful, if you don't care about any of that stuff, if you have no wisdom whatsoever, then you always think that you're wiser than everybody else. And you'll just always be ready with an answer. Okay.
The Gemara observes. Oh no,
Gemara records.
The Megillah records that based on Memuchan's advice, Achashverosh sent a proclamation throughout his empire declaring that every man should rule in his own house.
Right, that's what we were talking about before.
Rava remarked, were it not for these first letters containing this proclamation, there would not have remained a remnant or survivor from the enemies of Israel, a euphemism for the Jews themselves.
Right,
How did
enemies
this-
of Israel, we had it before.
Right,
Oneim shel Yisrael is really Yisrael, but it's going to be something that we're talking about that's bad.
yeah,
So we don't want to say something bad to happen to the Jews. So we say the enemies of the Jews.
Israel.
So the opposite, but we really know what we're talking about. Okay.
How did this first letter avert such a catastrophe? For upon seeing this first letter, the people said, "What kind of command is that which he sends us, that every man should rule in his own house? It is already obvious. Even a lowly weaver should be the authority in his own house." They therefore ridiculed the royal edict as foolish and did not pay particular attention to the second edict, which called for the destruction of the Jews. QED.
Okay, this is also wishful thinking, right? So what does Rava say? He says, thank God for this ridiculous rule, right? Thank God for for this proclamation. Now, once we saw that the king is tweeting nonsense, then we don't take his tweets too seriously, right? Halavai. I wish that would be the case. Unfortunately, it seems sometimes to be the opposite. But that's what Rava speculates, that because they saw that he was completely ridiculous in sending out a rule that was completely meaningless. You need to tell me this rule. Of course, we know that the men are supposed to be. Now, whether it really is true or not is another thing, but making it into a rule is worthless. So once they notice that Ahasuerus sends out rules that have no real meaning to them, then they don't pay attention anymore. They don't pay attention to whatever he sends. Whatever he sends out must be narishkeit, must be foolishness. You don't have to take it to heart. So then when he sends out a rule to kill the Jews, they don't take it to heart. Now, of course, the rule that was sent out had a particular time allotted for this. That's why it's called Purim, right? That Haman drew lots and figured out what day was supposed to be the day of the massacre. But partly of what Rabbi is saying is, you think that people would actually wait until that day? Kill all the Jews on the whatever it is, the 13th of Adar. You mean if I kill them on the 12th of Adar, I won't be doing a good thing? You want all the Jews killed. You think I have to wait till the 13th? So if they would have taken it seriously, if they would have really taken to heart that this is an important issue, that the welfare of the kingdom rides on this. So who knows what kind of mini pogroms and local pogroms would have happened all along. So thank God, that they didn't take it seriously, and therefore there were remnants and survivors among the enemies of Israel. Right? A very again, kind of wry, euphemistic idea that so as not to say no Jew would have survived. You don't even want to say such a thing. Okay, good. Weiter, as they say. Let's keep on going.
The Megillah relates that Ahasuerus was advised to seek a new queen in the following way: and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together every beautiful young maiden. And Ahasuerus followed this advice. Rav said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool spreads his folly. Who exemplifies the prudent man, and who the fool? Every prudent man acts with knowledge. This applies to King David, as it is written, and his David's servants said to him, let them seek for my master the king a young maiden to attend him. Since the people knew that the king sought only one maiden, as the verse states, a young maiden, whoever had a daughter brought her to him. Each one wanted his daughter to be chosen for the king. But a fool spreads out his folly. This applies to Ahasuerus, as it is written, and let the king appoint officers to gather all the maidens of the kingdom. The people saw that Ahasuerus wanted every maiden brought to his palace for him to live with, yet he would in the end take only one of them as a wife. Therefore, whoever had a daughter hid her from him.
Okay, so what's the difference? What's the difference between the wise person and the fool, between the considerate person and the person who is just a loose cannon. So with King David, the story is he's old, right? And he has a lot of problems as he's got the shivers, and he can't sleep at night. And the advisors say, we'll get one young woman to come and warm his bed. And that's what happens. And her name is Avishag. And then the story says that he did not have sexual relations with her, but she was basically his hot water bottle. Right? She was the person who kept him warm in bed. It's a pretty sorry picture that you get of this guy who was a real ladies' man and a real warrior and a real dynamic, and at the end of his life, and he's only 70, he's really in bad shape. But the point is that they're putting out, we need one maiden. So the Gemara says, wouldn't anybody think, wow, this is a great honor to be the maidservant of the king? And so everybody would anybody who thought that they had somebody who would be, good for that job, they would come forth, and you'd have the pick of the crop already, so to speak. The people would, the job description speaks for itself, and then people who felt that this was something that was good would do it. So it's all voluntary. But that's not what Achashverosh does. Achashverosh is the fool. Right? Achashverosh is the person who's not at all thoughtful, because what does he do? He sends out officials, right? So he's basically conscripting women for his own needs. So nobody's being fooled now. Everybody understands, well, maybe in the end somebody is going to be the winner, but what is this going to do for everybody else, right? And of course, that's what actually happens. He sleeps with every single woman that comes in until he decides who the right woman is. So everybody understands that this is actually not an honor. No, it's a it's a conscription. There were struggles. I don't know the history. Maybe some of you know it better. But the idea that the king had the right to sleep with every woman who was getting married, right?
Jus prime noctis, it was called, the right of the first night.
So how did people deal with that? They didn't, they weren't very happy about it. It wasn't like it was considered some big honor, because it wasn't about one person then, being the one person that the king is looking for. It's about the king can't have anybody that they want. Yeah, Jen.
Isn't one of the arguments Samuel has against a king just this, that, this is somebody who will take your daughters, etc.?
Yeah. Right. Okay. So now we've got the identification again. Clearly, Achashverosh, forget about him being evil. He's a fool.
He's just an idiot.
Right? He's an idiot, but not because he doesn't. Well, both sides, right? There's a moral side to it, and then he's going to make things difficult for himself, right? Because he's going to have to run after people who are hiding. Okay, we've got. Let's see if we go. We can read, one more paragraph.
The Megillah continues. There was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital, etc., a Benjaminite.
Okay, who's that Jewish man?
Mordecai.
Right. So, right, and this is one of the verses that we say out loud, right? Because this is an important, turning point in the story. So, in Hebrew, Ish Yehudi, Haya b'Shushan Habira, Shmo Mordechai ben Yoel ben Shimi ben Kish, Ish Yemini. So Mordechai is identified first as Ish Yehudi, And then at the end of the verse, Ish Yemini. Ish Yemini means a Benjaminite, right? From Ben Yamin. Okay, Mara asks.
The Gemara asks, what does this verse mean to teach by mentioning all these names? If the verse comes to trace Mordecai's lineage, let it continue to trace his lineage all the way back to Benjamin. Why then are these three names different in that they are mentioned in the verse, whereas Mordecai's other ancestors are not? Therefore, a Baraita expounded, all the names cited in the verse, Yair, Shimi, and Kish, are different designations of Mordecai himself. He is called the son of Yair, for he was a son who brightened the eyes of the Jews through his prayer. He is called the son of Shimi, for he was a son whose prayers God heeded. And he is called son of Kish, for he knocked on the gates of mercy, begging that the Jews be saved, and they were opened for him.
Okay, so all of those are now understood not to be his ancestors, but to be him, right? Different loving and admiring nicknames that were given for Mordecai because of how wonderful and how helpful he was to the Jewish people. All right, we'll come back to this starting from here next time, and look forward to it. Sei gesund, everybody.
Sei gesund, Yasher Koach.